Hey there, everyone. Welcome back for episode 6 of the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
I'm Brian.
So get your popcorn, turn off your cell phones, and get ready for the next episode.
Yeah, grab yourself a nice drink, a nice refreshing drink for this.
Let's dive right in here to Willy's Wonderland, the latest and greatest from the one, the only, the legendary Nicolas Cage. So this is a movie that came out. This is a 2021 release. So we have our finger on the pulse here, which is
without a doubt, that's impressive for us at this point in time.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen. I had Willy's Wonderland on my radar for a little bit here, just because it was Nick Cage. I'm a huge fan of his work in general.
Fair enough, yeah.
And B, Willy's Wonderland just looked like a wild and crazy ride. It looked right in line with some of his recent more wild, out there kind of movies that he's done. I'm thinking about specifically like Mandy and Color Out of Space. I mean, even the color scheme of like the posters and trailers was kind of in line with those other ones, with the kind of like the purples and the kind of neon lights.
And most
stuff.
recent movies you mentioned there, Mandy and Color Out of Space, really bringing Cage and horror films to the forefront. I'm not sure if he's done a ton of horror films in the past, but those two, especially in the past few years, have been really nice standouts, really good vehicles for him. I'll admit, I did not know about Willy's Wonderland coming out until you or somebody else mentioned it recently. I saw no trailers. I knew nothing about this movie going in, which was, and always is, kind of refreshing. So leading into this, what are some of the better Nick Cage movies for you? What are some of the standouts?
For me, so I have to be honest, I'm still going through his filmography, which, to be fair, is kind of massive. I was looking up his
huge
IMDb page, and I think there was like 160 different movies or something crazy like that. But some, like, I'll go through them kind of chronologically, I guess. But some ones that stood out for me were Moonstruck, which maybe might not be as familiar to a lot of maybe younger viewers. It was a bit more of like a romantic comedy, but Nicolas Cage gets his hand chopped off. It's pretty interesting. He's in there with Cher, Danny Aiello, the late great Danny Aiello. He passed away a couple years back, but that's great early Cage. Same with,
man, I'm looking at a picture of Nicolas Cage and Moonstruck. He looks like a baby in this film.
He does.
The movie's from 1987.
Oh yeah, he's got serious baby face, because we tend to know him now as when he's in his 50s now, I think, right? But also some other great ones. Obviously, Raising Arizona with the Coen brothers. He's well known for that one. For us, I think primarily he was like a huge action star in the 90s.
In the 90s, right? Yeah.
Where you had like The Rock, which is still one of the quintessential 90s action films. Back at when Michael Bay was kind of more subdued and could actually tell a story. It's still pretty great with Nick Cage and Sean Connery together. Great combination.
Well, it was a great time to be alive from about 95 to 2000 for Nicolas Cage fans. I mean, we were both entering high school in 95.
Yeah.
Seeing The Rock, Face Off, Con Air in there as well.
Con Air.
Like, these were, like, just every single year there for a bit was just another Nick Cage movie that was just tons of fun to watch.
And then there was Bringing Out the Dead with Martin Scorsese. Just showing off, like, because people forget, because he's done a lot of like low budget stuff recently, but he's worked with a lot of big name directors. And then there's like other kind of fan favorites like Gone in 60 Seconds.
Oh yeah,
just a ton of fun. National Treasure, if that's your cup of tea. I didn't really like it that much, but it was pretty fun. Adaptation, where he plays twins.
Directed by Spike Jonze, written by Charlie Kaufman.
Again, working with these kind of great directors and filmmakers, right? And then you have favorite of mine, Lord of War. It's a great film with him and Jared Leto.
That one, I remember seeing that in theaters. That was quite surprised at the time and how good it was, how engaged it was. It's still one I revisit every so often.
If you're a fan of Adam McKay, like what is it, The Big Short and Vice, it's kind of almost in that vein. It was like a Big Short before there was a Big Short. It's not talking about the financial industry, but it's kind of talking about Nick Cage is like he's illegally selling firearms to various various buyers, usually tyrants and dictators around the world. But it's very much like kind of looking in the camera, kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, or a wink and a nod to the audience kind of thing, kind of breaking the fourth wall at certain times. Ghost Rider, obviously not super great, but it was still fun. Cage doing his thing.
Not just one Ghost Rider, 2 Ghost Rider movies starring Cage.
There was a second one?
Oh yeah, Spirits of Vengeance. Can you tell I kind of enjoyed it?
Yeah, I still haven't seen Spirits of Vengeance, just because of how unimpressed I was with the first Ghost Rider. I'll have to check it out at some point. I'm going to go through.
Give it a chance, yeah. Spirits of Vengeance, I don't want to get too into it, but they really get a little more gritty with it. The visuals on it are, I mean, I don't want to say it's darker, but yeah, like the flames are darker. Everything just has a little more weight to it.
Okay.
It's entertaining.
No, I'm going to definitely check it out. Another couple ones I watched recently were Next and Knowing. This is kind of getting into, I mean, they were both kind of solid films, and Nick Cage has given his characteristically great performances, but like I think there was like a little bit of a lull there where I wasn't getting blown away by the type of movies he was in. Aside from, there was a great one in there, Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. If you've never seen it,
I've never seen that one. No,
you get to see Cage kind of cage out, as it were, and do some, because he's known for his like he can be very subtle, but he's also known for, I guess, his kind of boisterous, over the top, exuberant performances at times. And there's some great examples of that in Bad Lieutenant. He was in Kick-Ass.
Oh yeah,
as the Batman kind of proxy. I can't remember the actual character's name. Stolen, which is a Taken ripoff.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think I missed that one as well.
I have it on my shelf. I have to check it out sometime. Joe, which was
pretty solid.
A great little film. I think, was it Ty Sheridan? I always get Ty Sheridan mixed up with the other two. There's a couple other actors like Ansel Elgort.
You got it right with Ty Sheridan.
Okay. Yeah. Another one that gets me. I have it sitting on my shelf here. But Outcast with Hayden Christensen. So he's in there with Anakin Skywalker, and it's kind of this like medieval fantasy kind of film. The best part of the movie, though, is Nick Cage. At one point, his character loses an eye. But I guess it was so low budget, they didn't have a lot of special effects. There was no eye patch. It was literally him just squinting with his eye closed, because you could tell when he moved his eyes, you could see like his eyeball moving underneath his eyelid. Oh, okay. So it was literally him just like squinting one eye closed.
Oh,
no makeup. No, nothing. It's phenomenal. And then like we were talking about, I think, like Mandy. Like I love that film. Amazing film. Like visually, and just the way it was put together, the music behind it, and how it was this kind of very, very dreamlike. And then Nicolas Cage's performance in there was just, he has like. He goes from the dramatic and he goes to the maniacal, and he cages out hardcore. There's a chainsaw fight. It's just amazing. Honorable mention goes to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where he voiced Spider-Man Noir. Oh, yeah. Not a huge role, but I mean, it's Nick Cage in there, man. It's gonna make it better.
Definitely.
And then Color Out of Space, obviously, and Willy's Wonderland. It's kind of one of his latest and greatest.
Yeah, that's a serious liar. He's done so many films, and he's done so many different kinds of films. Do you remember? This is probably difficult to remember, like your very first Nicolas Cage film.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I can't remember which one was first, but it was like Con Air and Face Off were some of the first ones, I think. Yeah, Con Air, Face Off, and The Rock. Those are the first ones I recall seeing him in. I know, like, I watched like Moonstruck and some of the older ones after that, but growing up in the 90s and being into like the big action films were huge, right? It's like, we didn't have Marvel blockbusters. We just had these action films that only had one movie. There were no like sequels, prequels, sidequels, comic book series you had to read. You just went to the theater and watched a movie, and it was great.
That's right.
You didn't have to do like months of research to understand what was going on. It's crazy, I know.
I'm pretty sure the first Nicolas Cage movie I saw was Leaving Las Vegas. Did he win the Academy Award for that movie?
I believe he did, yeah. And that's the...
I mean, we cannot forget that Cage is an Academy Award winner.
No, I think it's become one of these kind of memes online where he's like, to kind of almost, where Cage has become almost like a parody of himself in certain circles. But really, I don't know what the background is. There's rumors about how he got into issues with owing back taxes and how he misspent his money, and so he just started taking every role that came along just to get money to pay off his bills. I don't know if that's true or not.
And I've heard those same rumors, and it's like it can kind of explain some of the more dubious movies that he's done and maybe some of the choices he was doing. And the narrative in my head is saying he did some of those movies. They were probably fun to do, and he just continued to go into that direction. He's done some real clunkers the past, decade. And he's done some really good stuff as well. He's not afraid to go back and forth. And you really get a sense that he's just out there having fun. And especially, it's at the top of my head right now, Color Out of Space and Mandy. I'm not sure if he had a hand in producing those films or just got in with with a production company that was responsible for these films. But it just looks like he's able to have fun in those roles. He can be the cagiest Cage.
No, and even when he was like, I don't know the whole backstory. Maybe he got into doing those kind of low budget, what we used to call direct to video movies. Maybe he was just having a ton of fun doing it. There was no pressure. Like, you don't have to do pressure for award seasons. You're not doing the interview circuits. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You just go in, do your job, get paid, and go home to your T-Rex skull, right? I mean...
That's right. He has a T-Rex skull.
He had it anyway. I don't know if he ended up having to sell that to a museum or something to make ends meet, or if there was issues. But yeah, like, things got pretty wacky. But for whatever reason, he ended up doing a lot of kind of lower budget, kind of, let's say, lower quality films. Let's be honest. I think you watch him and he always kind of gives it his all, no matter what film he's in, right? Sometimes,
without a doubt.
Sometimes I think maybe his tone isn't necessarily matching the tone of the film, which I think there's a disconnect there with the filmmakers.
It's about utilizing the talent that you have, right? And Nicolas Cage can fit specific roles and he can do specific things. And
yeah,
like you said, sometimes you get a little miscast here or there.
Well, I think I was going to use the analogy. I think I was playing Beyond Two Souls recently and watching the behind the scenes videos. And the director of that, David Gage, directs those video games / movies / hybrids. But he was talking about working with Willem Dafoe and now Elliot Page, and how essentially working with actors of that caliber, it's essentially like driving a Ferrari, where they're going to do exactly what you want them to do. So you have to be you have to be a precision driver, right? And I think Nick Cage, when you get to that level of talent, he's like a Ferrari, right? And if you don't know how to drive a Ferrari properly, it's different driving a Ferrari on a racetrack than it is driving your minivan to take your kids to soccer, right? So you have to know how to use the tools and the resources you're given and their strength. If you're going to drive a Ferrari, you have to know how to drive a Ferrari, right?
That's interesting. A few more for me that I've seen that stand out in my mind. I have my list on popularity on Letterboxd. So these will sort of not in any chronological order, but we have Wind Talkers. Did you ever see that one?
I haven't, actually. Was that a solid movie?
As I recall, it was pretty decent. John Woo film. If you want John Woo war film.
That was the one where they had like the Native American like code breakers.
Exactly, yeah. Perhaps one of the worst films I've ever seen, or maybe one of the worst Cage films I've ever seen, is Dog Eat Dog. And that's a film you and I watched a couple years ago with Willem Dafoe in it. Yeah, look at your movie shelf and you'll see it sitting right there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Nick Cage was in there. I can't believe I missed Dog Eat Dog.
That was a rough film. That was rough. I won't lie.
Oh, it was super rough. that was a paycheck for those people involved, I think.
There was also Snake Eyes in the mid-90s, which is Brian De Palma film, and one that really stood out. I really enjoyed that movie back in the 90s. I mean, Nick Cage was killing it back then. All his action movies, you got Snake Eyes. I didn't know it was De Palma at the time, and I've only really fallen in love with De Palma films recently after becoming aware. A lot of them are more adult thrillers, I think, that I would have missed back then, right? 8mm is another film that I missed. I think that was maybe late 90s. Yeah, 1999. And I just saw that for the first time a couple years ago. There's a lot of disturbing things going on in that film. He plays it pretty well.
I don't think I've seen 8mm. I did want to just chime in, and I did have Snake Eyes on my list, specifically because I remember there was that big kind of to-do over, like, I think it was like a big like half-hour opening shot. It was a big
one-shot, half-hour. It was really impressive.
It was a neat. I still remember scenes of that movie. Just like it'll come up in my day-to-day activities, where like that boxer beating up Nick Cage in the back alley and things like that. It's like, it's just weird. Like Snake Eyes just stuck with me.
The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which came out in 2010. I can't really speak to the quality of this film, but I remember seeing this with a friend. And this was also during a time when all the Harry Potter movies were coming out. We both commented at the time, at least we got to see a lot of, intense magic going on screen. I'm not sure how it compares to modern times, but it was kind of a refreshing change from the Harry Potter universe to see sorcerers doing bananas things on screen, right? Another recent film was Mom and Dad.
Mom and Dad.
Which was 2017. So that is one where I believe all the parents in this world go crazy and are trying to kill all their kids.
What?
Obviously, it's Nick Cage acting like a lunatic.
Oh my God.
Which is perfect for the role because him and his wife are trying to kill their kids. So it's the kids trying to escape from them and trying to fight back, right? It was a lot of fun. Definitely recommend it.
That sounds amazing.
I know you mentioned Bringing Out the Dead. I saw that recently as well. I can't believe I missed that one. Martin Scorsese, fantastic. We've got all the other action movies you mentioned there. And yeah, I think the only other film that I'd want to mention, and this one, we cannot forget about this movie, The Wicker Man.
Okay, yeah, so I have it sitting on my shelf right now, but I wanted to watch the original first.
Yes, that is a really good point, and you should watch the original first, because the original is a legit, really fantastic film. Basically, this investigator is going to an island community where there's been a murder, and he's investigating the murder, right? The storyline, the concept is both the same in each film, but the Wicker Man remake just falls off the rails and obviously gave us the infamous bee scene, which you will highly appreciate when you do watch it.
I'm aware of the not the bees meme. And I know it's from that movie. It seems to me this is one of those cases where I need to watch the original first.
So yeah, check out the original Wicker Man, 1973. It's a fantastic film. And Van immediately go check out Nicolas Cage in that film. I don't even know what to call it, that remake.
But yeah, so Willy's Wonderland was a little bit of a departure for Cage, but also exactly in his wheelhouse, if that makes any sense.
Let me read the synopsis here on Letterboxd,
okay,
to give you an idea what the plot is.
I'm sure it's not going to do it justice, though.
It won't. I love that these things are seemingly inaccurate. When his car breaks down, a quiet loner agrees to clean an abandoned family fun center in exchange for repairs. He soon finds himself waging war against possessed animatronic mascots while trapped inside Willy's Wonderland. And that's accurate. That's
pretty accurate, actually. I mean,
so like it's amazing. So the movie basically gets started with Nick Cage driving an American muscle car, hitting spike strips on the road, blowing out all 4 of his tires. He goes into town via tow from a local, and this repair shop does not take plastic. He can't pay with credit card. He doesn't have the cash to pay this guy for the repairs.
ATMs are down. There's no internet.
ATMs are down. They're completely isolated. So the guy asks him, "Are you willing to work to pay off this debt?" And Nick Cage nods in agreement. And they bring him over to Willy's Wonderland, which, as they said, is a family fun center. Think of a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant with an arcade and, special birthday room, events, just a general happening environment. And he has to clean this Wonderland, this building, for the night. And it kind of gave me that initial vibe is like, oh, okay, maybe this is going to be a spooky, haunted, abandoned children's restaurant where he has to survive the night, and in the morning he gets the keys to his car back fully repaired. But of course, in there are the animatronic mascots, which inevitably try and kill him. And going from here on out, I'll just say we're going to be talking about full spoilers.
When I said that Willy's Wonderland doesn't necessarily fit the mold of typical Nick Cage films, is because he doesn't say a single word throughout the whole movie. Right. So you don't get the typical kind of Nick Cage out where he's yelling those iconic lines.
It's a much more physically expressive performance, which he usually does give, but he usually has his voice to back it up, right? But this time he's silent, and it's not something you really maybe pick up on immediately, but you kind of, like, I was waiting for him to start talking. He just never does. He's a silent character throughout the film.
Well, it really felt like you get some inspirations from Westerns, right? Where you have the man with no name, somebody who comes into town, not big on words, but big on action, right? Very kind of Western-esque hero. You could picture him, facing down the villains in an old West film. You give him a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
The cowboy getup instead of his t-shirt and jeans, and his leather jacket with the sweet red racing stripe.
Yeah, instead of coming into town with all that, he comes into town, puts on a t-shirt, and has to face these giant, grotesque mechanical monsters.
Also, can I just say, I hope I look as good as Nick Cage does when I'm 55. I mean, that guy he's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you could tell, looking at his arms and stuff, like he's in really good shape. Like, he's an imposing physical figure in this.
I'm surprised we didn't get a topless scene with Cage in it.
Yeah, just barely, when he's bandaging himself up with duct tape after one of the fights. You kind of do that, but like you just see this. He looks. I don't know how tall he actually is, but he looks like a pretty imposing character in this film, and it's that physicality where he becomes like when he's fighting these big animatronic monsters that come to life one by one to try and kill him instead of swarming him at once. It's weird, and it's very kind of. I was really reminded of Sam Raimi and his early work in Evil Dead, and that kind of tone of like over the top kind of blood and guts, except the blood and guts was like the oil from these machines.
Yes.
But it was the way it was shot and the way it was spraying up, it looked like blood almost. And also just the way he fought these demons with his bare hands and just punching and kicking them, very, very much like Evil Dead, right? So they got that really cool old school Sam Raimi Evil Dead aesthetic where like he would just go nuts. He would be faced with this evil force and just punch the ever loving daylights out of this thing and rip off animatronic heads, rip out animatronic spines.
Yes, the spine was significant.
Or rip out animatronic quote unquote hearts. But it's like you could really tell the way it was framed and everything, and the way it was shot, the way they were like dripping with that oil. They really looked like organic components that he was ripping out of these things, right?
Without a doubt. I'm glad you mentioned that Raimi aspect because it does kind of hit on that, like a bit silly, tongue-in-cheek horror, but the physicality of it, like what is actually going on here? Like if that was, you could literally replace that oil with blood and have, actual spines being ripped out of these creatures and stuff. It would be the same kind of energy, it has the same vibe as Raimi.
Yeah, that kind of action horror comedy blend. And that's really where that's one of the movie's strengths, I think, is when it really plays into that blend of the horror and the comedy together, where it doesn't take itself too seriously, is when it really finds its strengths.
So it gets started because he begins cleaning this Willy's Wonderland Family Fun Center, if you want to call it that. And as he's sort of toiling away, this place is disgusting, right? Like it is abandoned. It's in really rough shape. He has a lot of work to do just to clean it. And he just starts working. And in the background, you see a stage full of the animatronic characters. I think there's 8 of them. And they kind of move a little bit and get his attention. Maybe he's seen things. He just continues about his job. The very first one that attacks him is an ostrich. And that one was this great scene where that
Ollie Ostrich
runs at him and says, "I'm going to feast on your face." They proceed to have a fight, and through oily gore. Cage rips out this ostrich's spine, and the best part here is when he just takes the ostrich apart, puts it into garbage bags. And maybe it's important to note here that the owners of Willy's Wonderland, the guys who set him up with this work, have locked him in there. But Cage doesn't know this yet. So Cage cleans up the body, puts him in the garbage bags, and goes to go outside to throw these bags out, finds that the door is locked, and just doesn't care. So he just leaves the bags at the front door and just goes back to work, like without skipping a beat.
Yeah, the whole thing has... or his whole character at least has a very kind of dreamlike quality. I don't want to say it's like phantasmagoric compared to something like Mandy, which is extremely kind of dreamlike and has a dreamlike structure and dreamlike logic. But his character almost has that kind of dreamlike logic where he's not trying to escape after he finds out he's locked in, and he's constantly, to a fault, he's taking his breaks throughout the night to go drink his his energy drink or his caffeinated
Punch Pop,
which is
it's a caffeinated soda, I think.
Yeah, in the break room there's this pinball machine. It's in a complete state of disrepair, and throughout the movie, on his breaks, of which he takes many, he's cleaning up this pinball machine. He starts playing this pinball game, even in the middle of a fight where the teens, there's a group of teens that come in. We're gonna get to that. But this group of teens comes into the store as well, or the restaurant as well, and they're in the middle of this fight, and his watch goes off, reminding him it's time to take his break, and he kind of looks over at this girl, one of the teenagers, and he kind of gives her a look, and he's like kind of torn, but then he's like hands her like the weapon he's been using. I think it's like the metal coil to clean out clogged drains, and he goes and takes his break and leaves this teenage girl to fight this giant evil animatronic monster. He eventually comes back once his break is done to help her out, but it's just like he's these weird little touches where he's like almost bound by this watch, bound by this routine, almost like something supernatural about his character.
His work ethic is through the roof, basically, but he's also kind of like work to rule, because he's not going to skip his breaks, right? He's going to take those breaks, just as the guy at the beginning told him, be sure to take your breaks. And as his watch dings, he indulges, takes those breaks. I guess they're well deserved because he's killing these things, but he's also doing a bang up job cleaning up this place. Like, it looks spotless afterwards. The second animatronic that comes to life is a giant green gorilla, which hides out in the bathroom, which he just finished cleaning up. So it said the bathroom's in spotless condition.
His name, by the way, is Gus Gorilla.
Gus Gorilla jumps out at him from one of the stalls. They have their fight. And I haven't seen a bathroom fight like this since Mission Impossible Fallout. And in that case, you could literally replace Henry Cavill with Gus Gorilla, and it has the same energy to it.
How the fight ends when he like curb stomps him on the urinal.
Yeah, like it's very graphic, very graphic.
Yeah, and even though it's an animatronic, cartoonish animal, it's like you're feeling that, like you're feeling that force and that pain, right? It's like it's really weird. It's to the filmmaker's credit how they make you feel that how visceral that violence is, even though that it's being done primarily against inanimate objects.
Yeah,
it's pretty nuts. And the bathroom afterwards, he cleans it up again, and it looks great.
He does a good job. The guy's a hard worker. And now I think you could probably talk about the group of teenagers. We're introduced to one of the girls who I think she's the daughter of the local police chief, and she wants to help out the stranger. She wants to help out Cage in Willy's Wonderland. She has a group of friends. She goes into the restaurant, and her group of friends basically follow her in. They're a little reluctant to, but now, we kind of have some fresh fodder for the animatronics, because obviously Nick Cage is not going to be taken out by these things. But these teenagers are not nearly a match for them as Nick Cage, so some of them are going to be getting picked off, right? So we have some of that horror element of people actually dying here.
Yeah, so the other character's name is Liv. She's played by, I want to give a shout out to the actress here, or actor, Emily Tosta is the actor who plays Liv. And she's set up almost like, I guess like a parallel kind of protagonist to Nick Cage's. Yep. Nick Cage's, he's referred to only as the janitor in the credits. So
that's right.
Kind of like a parallel, I don't want to say sidekick, but she's got her own story going on where she is the adopted daughter of the town sheriff, who is played by Beth Grant. Beth, I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion, Grant. She's great. She pops up in movies all the time. I think she's one of those character actors that doesn't necessarily get the recognition she deserves.
Mm-hmm.
But Beth Grant plays the kind of local sheriff. Emily Tosta plays her adopted daughter. And we find out later on that the reason she's an adopted daughter is because her parents were killed by these animatronic monsters when she was just a baby. And Liv and her gang of teenage friends, they want to burn Willy's Wonderland to the ground because they know that people have died there and it's dangerous, and they're trying to rid the town of this evil. And like you said, Brian, the teens kind of play double duty in that once they break in, because they're going to burn down the building, and Liv is like, "There's this guy in there. We can't burn him alive. Like, we got to go in there and rescue him." So they go in there and rescue him, kind of reluctantly, and they play double duty. One is to show how tough these animatronic machines really are, because Nick Cage makes it look not easy,
too easy,
maybe a little bit easy. And then these kids come in, and they're just getting their butts handed to them. They're getting torn to pieces. And then the other thing too is, as you pointed out, is to give the movie inject a little bit more gore in there, where you get some human characters dying. And I really didn't expect all of them to die, and so quickly. I thought Liv's love interest there, that one of the boys there, I thought he was gonna survive for sure, but they break his neck like in the middle of that scene, and I was like, oh, I guess it's not that kind of movie.
One of them gets immediately impaled by a sword from one of the monsters.
Nighty Night.
Nighty Night is the name?
Nighty Night.
I'm glad you looked up all the names of these animatronics, because I think the only one I know is Willy, who would obviously be the final animatronic to come to life and
Willy Weasel,
be the main adversary. Willy Weasel.
Cammy Chameleon kills people with her tongue. She snaps people's necks.
So yeah, basically they sort of unveil the secret of the town through these characters, right? They basically talk about the legend of this Willy's Wonderland opening up. All the employees are these serial killers.
Well, the owner is a serial killer, and then he creates this cabal of fast food workers / mass murderers, serial killers, and they're all working there. And essentially, they're using Willy's Wonderland as almost like a honeypot to lure in their victims and get them. And I guess their big thing is when they're celebrating kids' birthdays, they get to lure them to the back room, which is essentially like their secret kill room back there. And then again, very Sam Raimi-esque, where the cops finally find out what's going on, and they break down the doors, and there's going to be this big dramatic confrontation with this cabal of serial killers. But no, they performed a satanic ritual. And committed suicide so that their souls inhabited the bodies of these animatronic characters, and it's completely ridiculous and dark and horrible at the same time, and it very, very much has that kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of sensibility about it, and I love that whole thing. I love the whole backstory where it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense except in the horror movie logic, right?
Right. It's the same thing that went down in Chucky, like the original Chucky we're talking about, Child's Play, where some kind of satanic ritual is going on. The serial killer gets put into the body of a doll, and we're not really given a whole lot more context aside from that setup, and it's enough to go on. And this setup is perfect too. Just these killers are in here, so they're animatronic, but they have the souls of actual serial killers and murderers.
Not just serial killers, but serial killers who practice satanic evil rituals.
That's right.
Satanist serial killers.
Much worse than normal serial killers.
Yeah.
And as they explain later on, these serial killers in their animatronic forms go into town, like they leave Willy's Wonderland, go into town and just start murdering people. And as part of a way to curb that type of violence, the townspeople decide, we're going to lure in strangers, people bypassing their city. We're going to lure them in and effectively feed the animatronic characters their victims.
Yeah, it's almost a literal deal with the devil. To essentially what they're doing is it's this whole human sacrifice going on where they promise, if you don't kill the people in our town, we'll sacrifice other people passing through to satisfy your hunger. It's almost like it's very kind of reminiscent of, ancient stories and ancient religions. You think of like the Aztec gods and human sacrifice and this kind of thing. Very kind of creepy stuff. But again, it's in that kind of Sam Raimi-esque mold where it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's fun. It's gruesome. It's cheesy. It's a great setup. I love the whole concept of it.
It doesn't need to make sense because of all those reasons you mentioned there. I mean, this film comes in just over 90 minutes, and it is engaging. Like it's kind of unfortunate that I can judge modern movies or movies in general based on how many times I'm tempted to reach for my phone to look at Reddit or something. And I was not looking at the internet. I was not looking at my phone at all during the runtime of this. I was fully engaged from start to finish.
Yeah, it's definitely not longer than it has to be. If anything, it could have been a little bit shorter even, because it felt like when they were telling the story about the background of the serial killers and the satanic cult, that could have been trimmed down a little bit. We didn't need to go into that much detail, but yeah, it wasn't dragging its heels, that's for sure.
So what did you think of Nicolas Cage's dancing at the pinball machine?
I was going to say that was one of the highlights of the movie because Nick Cage still gets to Nick Cage out, but he can do it without words. It's amazing. Where he's by the end of the film, I think it's his last break. And maybe I don't know if there's supposed to be some symbolism where he's been trying the whole time on the pinball machine to get up to, I guess the holy grail back in the day was to get 1 million points right on these machines, because that's when the points would roll over and you'd start again, and like 1 million points was like a big deal. And so you see him playing on the machine on earlier breaks, and he can't quite get it, and he's getting frustrated. And on this one, his last time, he starts like doing this weird dance in between, and I'm doing it now. Brian can see me. I'm kind of going where he's like
he's got arms, the hand going.
Oh yeah, he's got like the hand going and everything. And it's just like this weird kind of almost like trance-like, dreamlike state where you got like the shots of like the pinball machine going, and I think it's supposed to be symbolic of him essentially kind of triumphing over evil, right? Where he's consistently defeating all these different bad guys. It's almost like a video game. I know that there's an actual video game called Five Nights at Freddy's. I think it's a video game series. That's almost this exact same premise, to the point where I'm almost positive there's going to be some legal background going on.
They definitely mentioned Five Nights at Freddy's in the IMDb trivia, and how this initially, I think people thought this was a direct adaptation of that game series. I'm not familiar with the game or what that property is.
I know it exists and I know the basic premise, but I've never actually played it. But yeah, this whole scene is like, it's filming. Nick Cage is dancing. He's dancing crazier and crazier, and the pinball machine's going, and he gets the 1 million points, and he's like throws his hand up in the air in victory. And it's just crazy scene. You can't turn away. It's mesmerizing.
It is fantastic that this is all taking place on his breaks, right? You see him get excited. He's happy because of his leisure time activities. All the killing, all the dispatching of these animatronics, it's just a job to him. Those are obstacles to him finishing his job. And he takes the real pleasure in that. But there is definitely a parallel in achieving that high score in his pinball machine to him being finished with not only a job, but basically killing all these satanic serial killer animatronic monsters.
It's great too. There's one line Liv gives at one point where the sheriff gets wind of what's going on, and she goes to rescue her adopted daughter, and they handcuff Nick Cage, and Liv gets to speak the line. I think it's either directly taken from The Watchmen or an homage to The Watchmen, where it's like, you don't understand. He's not locked in there with them. They're locked in there with him.
It was a direct reference to Rorschach and Watchmen. Yeah.
I know it was kind of cheesy and it's kind of an obvious reference, but I love that whole scene with Rorschach and the Watchmen. And really, it applies to Nick Cage here too. It's great just showing how, to the outsiders, just what a force of nature Nick Cage's character actually is. Where like the teens had so much trouble dealing with these animatronics when they got in there, and she sees him like ripping their heads off and ripping their guts out and dispatching them, and he literally saved her life. And then just to get that, to really build up how awesome this character is for when that final battle with Willy Weasel happens. It's really the first time. There's two great things that happen with this one. One is probably the best scene of gore in the whole movie is when the sheriff comes back again because Nick Cage just refuses to die, and and she comes back again and she sees him just casually taking out the trash, and like he's walking back to the door and he just like kind of looks over at her and waves super casual, and she's like at the end of her rope is like, why won't you just die? And she goes back in there with her shotgun. It's like, all you had to do was die. Like, why you're gonna doom the whole town here? And out of nowhere, Willie comes up behind her and literally like rips her in half.
Yeah, she's cleaved in half, like with no effort on Willie's behalf, you know?
And like, it's great. There's blood just spurting out of her legs that are still standing there for a couple seconds. It's amazing. Yeah. Great scene of gore.
The camera lingers on basically her legs and just her bloody stump of legs there. And the perfect amount of comedic timing where very shortly afterwards, that massive splurt of blood comes pumping out of her legs, right?
Oh, great gore for the gore lovers out there in the horror community.
It's pretty horrific. While I was watching this movie, I couldn't help but think of maybe this being a commentary on the workplace and an employee's mental health at the workplace. Nicolas Cage representing your average worker. In this particular case, he has a really strong work ethic, right? But he just goes, he does his job, and he's numb to everything that's going around it, right? This is probably a stretch, but it would definitely enter my head a few times where, you know, you have this group of teenagers come in, they're dying, they're having a hard time. He doesn't really react to any of that. And it's kind of this, it reminds me where maybe some of your coworkers are going crazy at work, they're venting, they're losing their minds, and what can you do but just keep working? And that's all Nicolas Cage has in mind. He has one goal: finish this job so he can get his car back, right? Just like we have one goal at work is to finish off our day of work, get paid, and go enjoy our pinball afterwards.
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought that up, because he does seem like, if there was going to be some kind of deeper meaning to it, that seems to be it. And like you said, he was very kind of nonplussed by everything going on around him. He almost seemed kind of jaded, almost like you'd see like a dead body, and almost like, I don't think he actually gave a sigh, but it was almost like you could feel like, ugh.
That's another mess for him to clean up.
Just another mess. It's like, I'm just trying to get through the night to make enough money to pay for my car. And it's like, it doesn't really, he's not a hero, so to speak. He's not out there intentionally saving people. He's literally just trying to get his job done, and all these people and evil satanic animatronic monsters keep trying to get in his way. And it's like, I just want to do a really good job, get my car, and keep on going to wherever he was going, whatever adventure he's off to next.
Right. Are there any bad elements to this film? Anything that stood out to you?
Well, a lot of things worked for me, but something just didn't quite click to make this kind of quote unquote like magical, or to make this kind of stand out. It felt like, oh, there's so many good ideas in here, and they could have played it up a bit more, like a bit less of the backstory, or play up that backstory a bit more, play up the satanic ritual components, make the monsters a little bit more menacing, maybe.
Well, the exposition into the satanic ritual was very much like narration, where it's just a character telling you exactly what was happening, right? There's no lead up to it. There's nothing really hinted at. It's just matter of factly telling you that this is what happened and this is where we are now.
But like, for example, I keep coming back to the Evil Dead, but you look at the Evil Dead, and there was the Necronomicon. It was an actual plot point where they read from the Necronomicon. That brings the evil to life, to haunt them. But then later on, they read from the Necronomicon, to kind of, fight back against the evil. So there was that through line, right? Of like, here's the evil. It was an object. It was a book. But there was nothing like that here. It was just, they were satanic rituals, and that's why they're possessed. But they didn't play into that anymore, into that kind of mythology, which I think to the film's detriment, where they could have really done a little bit more. I hesitate to say world building in a movie like this, but if you're going to have this be the result of like serial killers, like satanic serial killers, like have them stumble upon a secret hidden room where you got the bones of children and stuff, right? Like play up that gruesome aspect a bit more.
Yeah.
Play up the comedy a bit more. And have it kind of consistently interlaced throughout. It felt like there were too many not lulls in the action, but it felt like it was a tight pace, but something just felt a little bit off. It didn't, I don't know. Like it's hard to describe what was kind of missing from this. I mean, some of the acting was a bit off from the teenagers. They were supposed to be this group of friends, but they were always fighting with each other. Like I didn't really get the sense of camaraderie.
Yeah, and maybe it's just me getting too old. I'm out of touch with all the kids these days, but I'm not buying, their group of friends. There was this great moment where they're pouring gasoline on the building outside, and the one guy starts pouring gas at a spot, and his buddy is just like, why are you pouring gas there? I literally just poured gas there. Stop putting gas on top of my gas. And I couldn't help but get some enjoyment out of that. But I do agree there was something strange about the film that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And right from the very beginning, the introductory scene, which is a scene where I think you have parents and their child in Willy's Wonderland enjoying the special birthday. And I think it plays some ominous music. The camera pans over to a television screen and you just see a splat of blood on the screen, but you don't get a sense of really what is going on, like what is going to be set up here. Wherein if you focused on the satanic stuff in that introductory scene, it might have been more effective for that payoff later on. It felt like that introductory scene, as you said, it's really hard to put your finger on. It felt kind of empty, like it didn't bring any weight to the movie, because we got a bunch of flashbacks of these families being murdered while they're explaining the backstory of the film, right? But we had a scene that sort of did that before, but just didn't do it well enough.
So I think I can articulate now, I think there's a lack of tension throughout the film where there's no real mystery, right? Like early on, we're shown that these animatronics are evil, right? We know it from the very beginning. They start doing creepy stuff right away. Like there's no build up, there's no tension to it. And those families at the beginning, that family at the beginning, they show that kind of takes the mystery out of it. Then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like we know that people are going to be killed in this place. Whereas, like I would prefer it to be, even though you know the premise going in, like you have to build up that tension, and you have to have the setups and the payoffs, but I don't think there was enough of that, right? There was nothing really set up in the first half that really paid off in the last half.
Yeah.
Right? So there's nothing really, you're not setting up any big things where it's like even the standard kind of gearing up sequence, he put a bunch of pop cans in a bag and tied a couple sticks together. Like
it's underwhelming.
It was kind of, I thought he was going to like make some kind of device with a blade on it or something. If you're going to do the gearing up scene.
Is this proper usage of the term, like Chekhov's gun? There's no Chekhov's gun in this movie. Like there's no payoff to something that was set up earlier. Yeah, there's no payoff in terms of like character ability, character knowledge, like a specific item or a specific place, or there was none of that to kind of tie the movie together. It was just like, here's a scene, here's another scene, here's another scene, but nothing really kind of tying them together narratively. Like literally Nick Cage's character doesn't change whatsoever. He starts off fighting these characters, killing them, and he finishes off fighting them and killing them.
They try to tack on a bit of an arc where at the beginning he's a loner, and at the end he lets that the girl Liv, who's now an orphan because her stepmom is dead now. He lets her tag along with him on his adventure. So it's like they're trying to get that sense of like, oh yeah, he's, learning to be, learn to be more sociable and accept other people into his life. But that was never, it was tacked on at the end. It wasn't carried through. There was no kind of through line where he was like struggling with, like, oh, do I go save this person, or do I take out this animatronic over here and do I kill Willy and end everything right now, or do I go save this girl and maybe risk losing something else? But there was, like I said, it's a lack of tension narratively, lack of tension in terms of character development and character growth, which as a horror film you don't need to have like giant life-changing epiphanies, but there has to be some kind of arc, right, where maybe they don't learn something about the nature of life like you would in like an Akira Kurosawa film, but they learn to believe in themselves, to be strong. They have the strength inside of them to fight off this evil where they thought they were they came up across this initially. Like you look at something like Cabin in the Woods, where the main character in that one, I can't remember the actor's name, but she starts off really meek, really mild, and then but through the whole thing she becomes, it's the final girl kind of cliche, I guess.
You nailed it on the head right there, yeah.
The final girl is, at its core, it's a character arc, right? They start off kind of weak, they start off kind of scared, and then they find the strength and the courage in themselves to fight back against this evil force. And that's a kind of standard horror movie arc, but it's an arc. It's a character arc.
And this one, Nicolas Cage is basically at the top of his game right from the beginning.
Yeah.
He has no real issue dispatching of these monsters.
Even the final fight with Willy Weasel, he gets clawed up a little bit, but then he goes back immediately with his what would you call it? When you fill a sack with something with items, there's a actual term for this. But he has a sack of pop and a stick, and then he goes and just like beats him with this sack of, like, they're full, their pop cans are full, but he's beating it with this sack of pop cans and like a couple sticks tied together, and he just beats him again. Like he's not taking some special knowledge he learned along the way to defeat him. He's just doing the same thing. So it felt kind of repetitive too in terms of the fighting. Yeah. Just like monster shows up, Nick Cage doesn't look impressed with it. It attacks him. He rips its head off, and then kind of rinse and repeats, which kind of got stale after a while. There was no raising of the stakes either, right?
It's not like Willy Weasel had some special ability or invulnerability that was utilized beforehand. He literally just has to be punched, this time with a bag of pop cans, which there's no special hurdle to beat the final boss here.
Right. Yeah, so lack of tension, no character arcs, no raising stakes. It's like, here's an example of what I mean. So they talked about like the satanic rituals where the serial killers use to essentially possess these animatronic characters. So what would have made the movie better? One thing, just one idea, just spitballing out here, but say Nick Cage starts killing these animatronic characters, right? And puts them in the bags, and then he goes back to do his cleaning, and he sees up on stage all the characters are back there again. Mm-hmm. So he's fighting them, and he thinks he's killing them, but they keep regenerating and keep coming back to life, right? So he's essentially, they're just never going to die. He can't kill them. And then that girl comes in, talks about the satanic rituals. It's like, oh, here's this book of satanic rituals. We have to like make this pentagram on the floor and have these candles, and we have to, recite these incantations to kind of defeat them, right? But so like there's that narrative through line, or like where you have that knowledge that you didn't have at the beginning, and you take that knowledge that you acquire throughout, and then you use that knowledge to defeat the bad guys who have the special ability. That would have been something. I'm just spitballing. Doesn't have to be that, but just have.
I like it.
Have something like that.
Like right there, you just they could accomplish all this in the same 90-minute time span of the film, and it would be more satisfying.
And then even have like, just to kick it up a notch, it's like, oh, in order to complete this ritual, you have to have a human sacrifice to do this. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, which character is going to sacrifice themselves to save the town? Yeah. Something like that, right?
You've been able to articulate what I've felt throughout this movie as well, very well. I had a note here, it just said, felt oddly shot, and there's a ton of lens flare. And this one J.J. Abrams, eat your heart out. The lens flare in here was amped up to ridiculous degrees, and it's not like it was in every scene, but when lens flare showed up, not only was the flare like in your face, but it blinded out 3/4 of the frame of the movie when it did, and that felt really strange to me. The movie didn't have a really consistent look to it.
Absolutely. And then in terms of how it was shot too, did you notice like all the really wide angle shots? Like is it anamorphic or panoramic, but it like so wide they distorted the image so like things looked like they were like on like a convex mirror or something?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because it makes me feel a little more sane. I took note of this as well. I believe, and my camera knowledge, lens knowledge is not great here, but I know one of the techniques of making a wide image is kind of using a wide image that the sides of the image get a little more compressed than the middle of the image, and so the outer portions of your image get kind of stretched out or compressed together. And you can see this in certain movies, like I think Die Hard, you can see this in. But the difference between a well-shot movie and one like this is that they don't have characters performing in that weird space of compression. And there were multiple shots in this movie where characters were standing at either edge and having dialogue. And because of that, your eyes go to that character and you see that person they're compressed, like they look different from the people in the middle of the frame. And it was like the movie was shot with two different lenses. And this anamorphic lens was like this, and it's fine. You don't notice it for a lot of the shots, except there's actors walking through it and performing in that space.
I don't usually notice these elements of cinematography, but I think one of the issues is because you use on any film, you're going to use any number of lenses, right? Like again, my knowledge about lens use is very limited in terms of film, and I just know that you're going to use different lenses for close-ups than for far away shots or for large panoramic shots. But the difference between like a really well shot film and maybe something that's not quite up to par is intentionality, right? It's one thing if you use that lens intentionally, but it just feels like it stood out to me maybe because it was kind of haphazard or didn't fit the scene that well. Even there was a shot of the parking lot, and it just felt weird where the whole scene felt like curved around and distorted unnecessarily. Like there was no like additional imagery. There wasn't like a character coming on from that side or anything. There wasn't like a car driving up. It was just like a static shot that was really distorted. Yeah. And it was just it stood out like a sore thumb. Just like a couple shots like that inside too, like you're talking about, where the characters were talking to each other, but all of a sudden the lens changed and they were distorted. It was really weird.
Whereabouts on the star rating do you put this movie? How many stars do you give this movie?
It was tough. I really, really wanted this to be one of those special films like Mandy in recent times. I gotta keep bringing this up because Mandy was one of these kind of rare once in a couple of years kind of film, or once in a decade kind of film, but really felt kind of special, right? Willy's Wonderland had so many great ideas, so many great elements to it, but it just kind of fell flat in the delivery, and for me that kind of brought it down to a 3 out of 5 star rating.
I was leaning towards about 2.5 stars for this. It was perfectly serviceable, enjoyable movie. I think there were a few drawbacks which I noticed that would reduce the star rating, but basically prevents it for me to go any further on that rating. I mean, I might revisit this movie a few years down the road and say 3.5 stars because I can appreciate it for what it is. But the first time I'm watching it, I'm just noticing too many little things that kind of pull me out of it. And the lack of depth and tension that you mentioned before really holds the film back. I can't give it any more than that 2.5 because it might tread into territory where it's just not as good as other films. You can get a lot of other quality horror films like this at better value, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Like you look at kind of some recent films where you think about, thinking about Resolution or The Endless or Hereditary or Midsummer. all kinds of like more recent horror films, and they're not all necessarily kind of action horror comedy hybrids, but films that really, horror films that really stood out to me in recent years. And this not obviously, but this one just didn't quite reach those same kind of heights. The Void's another great one. Again, The Void is kind of like not really tongue in cheek, not like slapstick kind of comedy, but it knows exactly what kind of movie it is.
Yeah, I think going in with the proper expectations, you could have a lot of fun out of this film.
Yeah,
just with the proper expectations. And that wraps up another episode of the Real Film Chronicles. As always, we really appreciate you listening, hanging out with us, and giving us the motivation to put this show together. In this episode, we talked about Willy's Wonderland starring the ever-favorite Nicolas Cage. We were also able to discuss some of our favorite Nicolas Cage movies growing up, and I'm curious what some of your favorite films have been. So drop us a line. Our email and Facebook links are in the show notes. We are available at realfilmchronicles.com. Until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll see you again soon.